When we started this podcast, we were scrapping, just trying to build a show. We've not always been this runaway social phenomena, the number one ranked podcast in the Osage neighborhood, the, quote, best new podcast in the Centihela Adobe corridor. No, we were a humble little podcast trying to build an audience brick by back-breaking brick. Then, on October 22, 2019, after we'd just begun, an email arrived.
You've got mail.
I'm a Venice, California-born, Los Angeles-based sports fan, one that has played, coached, announced, and promoted sports my whole life. My love affair with sports started in my own backyard and has led me to this podcast. Thanks to the support of the Amateur Athletic Union in East Bay, I'm excited to bring you Sports Stories with Denny Lennon. Hello, sports historians. Hope everybody's doing okay. These are challenging times, but we're going to get through it. Welcome to episode 27 of Sports Stories with Denny Lennon. That email, it was from Rear Admiral Hal Pittman. Yes, you heard me. An admiral wrote us an email. I don't know about you, but that was the first time I ever got an email from an admiral. I mean, I love the best TV show of all time, Magnum P.I., the original one from the 80s, of course, and Magnum was only an officer in the Navy. Granted, he was a Navy SEAL and he quarterbacked Navy to a big win over Army before he was shipped off to Vietnam, but nonetheless, he wasn't an admiral. Okay, before I go any further, let me introduce the producer of today's show, my quarantine partner for life, my wife, Christine Jinbo.
Hi, everybody. I'm here to tell you that we have shows on all 5 weekdays now.
That's right.
So follow us on Facebook. Follow us at sportstoriespodcast.com. Like our posts on Facebook and Instagram. Rate us. Subscribe. Do it all. We need your help. We need your support to keep going. So that's my message to you today.
Way to go. Talk about those Facebook Live shows. So FBL 5, that refers to Facebook Live at 5, and that's always Pacific Standard Time. Monday, we go with a long-form interview. Tuesday, we feature a roundtable that's going to discuss the legendary Venice Backyard Championships. That was an iconic volleyball tournament. Ran from 1983 to 1996 in the backyards of Venice, California. That should be a lot of fun. Wednesdays, we put the spotlight on high school athletes, college athletes, all the way up to Olympic athletes and those that cover them. And then Thursdays, those are these video podcasts that drop. And finally, on Fridays, it's kind of a happy hour, let it fly, with a potpourri of guests type of show. So FBL 5 is what we're doing, and we hope you'll join us there.
I just wanted to interrupt really quick and remind all of our listeners that if you tune in live at 5 on Facebook, that you can then leave live comments that we can put up right to our guests. So if you want to have your comments show, and interact with us, definitely tune in live at 5. But you can always replay it on YouTube and on Facebook.
That's right. That's right. So it turns out that Rear Admiral Hal Pittman held many positions in a decorated and illustrious naval career. Among them, he was the Deputy Chief of Staff for NATO International Security in Kabul, Afghanistan. So you know, Christine, I was part of an earthquake search and rescue team while I was the coach at St. Mark's School in Venice.
Nice.
Yep.
Pretty prestigious.
Oh, yeah. I also did security for after-school pickup when I coached at St. Bernard High School in Playa del Rey. Yep. I had a walkie-talkie and everything. I'm not bragging. It's the truth.
Walkie-talkie?
Yeah.
What?
Hal.
Who gave you that?
Well, that's questionable. Hal, well, now that I've interviewed him and that he's coming on our Facebook Live show on Friday, I can call him Hal, but if you guys meet him, you should probably call him Admiral Pittman. So Hal had wrote to the show to say that he enjoyed it and that we should interview his son, Evan, the powerlifting violinist, that we did, in fact, feature on episode 16. So while I was emailing my new buddy Hal, I found out that he, among his many accomplishments, had initiated and implemented is probably a better word, a sports diplomacy program in partnership with the U.S. Embassy and various sports federations. He was named advisor for life for the Afghanistan National Olympic Committee. One of the diplomats or sports representative that accompanied Hal was, wait for it, Sports Stories Episode 3 guest Rusty Buchanan. Okay, your minds are blown, I know. Above all, Hal has showed that he's a true leader, someone who's able to care for those that he works with in order to accomplish the mission at hand. One of the greatest leaders ever, a former WW2 Navy man himself, the great teacher and UCLA basketball coach John Wooden spoke about leadership.
Well, if I get out of control, how can I tell them to be under control? How can I tell them that if they lose their self-control, they're going to be outplayed when I apparently am losing my self-control on the bench? So I tried to do that. Part of the example. The example is the greatest teaching thing we have. I once heard something said, no written word, no spoken plea can teach our youth what they should be, nor all the books on all the shelves. It's what the teachers are themselves. Well, a coach, that's all he is a teacher, and I think your actions can determine to a great deal the actions of those under your supervision.
So that said, we lined up the Admiral, and, please take note. Pittman is the third member of the Navy to do an interview for the Sports Stories podcast. Mike McKay was episode 4, Doc Martini was episode 5, and wait, make it 4 considering Thomas Magnum III is part of the show. And John Wooden is more or less a full-time contributor to the show, so that makes it 5. That must make Sports Stories with Denny Lennon the show of record for the Navy. So, anchors away, people. It was on January 12. We jumped in a car and headed to LAX. Then we hopped a plane for PHX, where at the Happy Factory Fitness Gym in Phoenix, we interviewed the retired Navy Rear Admiral and current Director of Military and Veteran Engagement for Arizona Public Service, my buddy, Hal Pittman. Please note, the following interview with Hal Pittman was recorded on January 12th, 2020. I think I talked to you briefly, right before, about there were some similarities in when we were going around the country and trying to teach everybody just how to run a beach volleyball tournament, what the specific rules were compared to indoor. And there's some resistance, and other people were very involved in it. And I noticed that today when you're working with these people here about just proper procedures that you go through. Talk a little bit about spreading the sport, or teaching the sport.
So I'm, a vice chairman for AAU Strength Sports,
Yep.
and we have a powerlifting meet coming up here at this particular location, the Happy Factory, here in Central Phoenix. And so what we did today was we had several individuals who were basically undergoing training to learn how to judge the lifts.
Okay.
And then there were several individuals who were just here to learn how to do the lifts properly under, the rules of AAU powerlifting.
So that they could teach.
That's right.
In effect.
And so that they can teach, and so that they can also compete, because there are some technical aspects to powerlifting, particularly, for example, if you're learning the squat. And so being able to properly do the lifts, it's not the way you do it in the gym, it's the way you do it on the platform, and it's very strict, and it ensures equality, that all the competitors are doing it in the very same way, uniformity of motion and activity. So so we did that, and we spent about, 2.5 hours or something like that going through the individual lifts. And then what we had was we took the folks that were going to be doing judging, and we had them sit in the chair and actually do judging.
And judge one another.
And judge their colleagues doing the lifts, and either give them a white light or a red light.
Sure.
And so that everybody could learn from the process and learn not to jump the commands or anything like that.
One of the things that was most difficult for us in beach volleyball is it's officiated for the most part, not unlike junior tennis, where the athletes conduct the play. Right. Until perhaps it gets to the championship games and you might have an official, or the national tournaments and stuff. And the most difficult part was to get them to enforce that it's the athletes that are conducting, right?
Yes.
What is your most difficult part of teaching, or what's the most difficult part of conducting, a fair competition?
So I think in powerlifting specifically, it's just to get the people to understand the rules of how to do the strict execution of the lift. For example, in the bench press, you go into any gym in America, you see people doing the bench press, but it's all different ways that they do it, and they bounce the bar off their chest, and you see their butts are off the bench and things like that. And so it's getting people to, check their ego at the door and come in and be able to just learn how to do it properly. And then you won't be embarrassed when you go to a meet and you're held to the standard that you're going to be held to.
That's it. Because when, sometimes different parts of the country would allow their local rules to seep into the competition, but then when their best teams came out for the big competition, now they're at a disadvantage.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
So I noticed Appalachian State was where you did your undergrad work.
Yep.
Did you grow up in the Virginia area or something?
So I actually grew up in Maryland, and my father was a steel worker, and he retired about the time I was ready to go to college. So he and my mother were originally from North Carolina. They moved home, and so I went to App State. That's where I ended up. I had some cousins that had gone there. Okay. And to be perfectly honest with you, my parents, neither of them attended college. Matter of fact, my father didn't graduate from high school, and they didn't really know how to advise me on approaching college or approaching a career or anything like that. So it was just by luck that I ended up going there. And then when I graduated from college, that's when I joined the Navy.
Now, what in Maryland? What part of Maryland?
Baltimore.
Oh, Baltimore. Okay.
Balmer.
So, yeah. So did you go to what high school?
Overley High School in Baltimore County.
Did you compete in sports there?
Or? Yeah. So growing up, when I was younger, I played a lot of baseball, and then in high school, I was a wrestler. Okay. And I started my love affair with weightlifting when I was in high school as well.
Do you remember any adults that kind of showed you the way when you were young, or identified you and said, "Hey, you'd be good at this"?
My dad.
Yeah.
My dad took me. I told him that I wanted to play baseball. We would watch the Baltimore Orioles, and this was in the heyday of the Baltimore Orioles.
So you got Brooks Robinson cleaning it up at third base?
Jim Palmer, Brooks Robinson, Frank Robinson, and those guys.
Nice.
And so my dad would take me to the back of the church. A concrete wall, rubber baseball about that size.
Oh, yeah.
And so he would just throw to me. He would pitch to me. We'd get a distance that was about the right distance for little league pitching mound, and he would pitch, just throw fastball after fastball after fastball.
Cool.
And that's how I learned to hit. And we would play catch, and that's how I learned to. I mean, it was just with him, Yeah. And so I signed up for Little League Baseball, and the coach wanted to. And I told him, when he called me, I told him I had never played on an organized team before, and then when we started the practices, he said, "I thought you said you hadn't played on an organized team," and I said, "I haven't. I've only played with my dad, and so we're in the neighborhood and stuff." So anyway,
he had gone through the Mr. Miyagi training,
I guess,
right? Right?
Wax on, wax off.
Next thing you know, you can do this.
But I had fun with that, and then just growing up kind of in a tough neighborhood in Baltimore. I mean, I kind of gravitated towards the martial arts a little bit and towards wrestling. And it was kind of, half for fun and half to stay safe.
Yeah, of course.
And I was a wrestler in high school, and my friends and I dabbled in the martial arts quite a bit, and that's one of the reasons why I was really happy to see Evan go into Taekwondo and make a decision about that much earlier than I ever
than you did.
Was
now,
when
when you graduated Appalachian State and you decided Navy, how come? Why did the Navy stick out?
So
I mean, Maryland in that area is
the Naval Academy,
Navy
right?
Town, yeah.
But I hadn't thought about it at the time, and I was actually married at the time and with a child on the way, and it was a means to an end. It was guaranteed employment right away, and at the time, my wife's father had served in the Navy for more than 20 years.
I see.
And I actually went to all the services and, checked in with all the recruiters. And each of the recruiters are a little bit different, right? So, and you'll hear this. Most people who have served in the military will tell you a story about going to the different recruiters. And so I could never find the Air Force guy. They had probably already made their quota. And the Navy guys were really aggressive about getting me. And the Army were, they have a lot of people that they put through. And so they sort of said, here's the standards that we need, and let us know if you're interested. And then the Marines were pretty aggressive too. And I said, is this do I want to be a Marine? And I ultimately, I think probably because they were the most aggressive, and also they really courted me, and they had some interesting programs. I think the Navy recruiters were the ones that that's ultimately the choice I made.
Okay.
And so, and I, even though I had a college degree, I enlisted. Okay. So, and the college degree is a pathway to become an officer in the military.
No doubt.
But I, at the time, we were going, the country was going through a recession. And, employment was kind of tough. Unemployment was fairly high. And, I went in, and then based on my performance as an enlisted sailor, a couple of years later, I was able to go to officer candidate school.
And that's when they identified you. And did you get identified, or is it performance-based?
So it's based on your evaluations and the recommendations that you get. And, of course, you have to take a test battery. And, so I did fine on the test battery. And then this was during the Reagan years of, build up and all that.
Yeah, there was actually funds available to.
Yeah. And so
where was your first deployment?
So let me tell you this story about officer candidate school.
Sure.
And I sometimes recite this story for a specific reason. So in my officer candidate school class, I went to officer candidate school in the summertime, Newport, Rhode Island, and it was the class that convenes right after college graduation. So it's the biggest officer candidate class of the year. And there was like 350 officer candidates in this class. And, I struggled. I didn't take a rigorous academic workload in college. I struggled in OCS. There was a lot of engineering, a lot of technical stuff, celestial navigation, damage control, engineering generally. And anyway, so the bottom line is I finished in the lower half of that 350. So I was probably in the 60th percentile. So, I didn't set the world on fire academically, but I was the first person in my OCS class to pin on a star.
Oh.
And I tell people that because it's not about the intellect. There's, book learning will only take you so far. It's about how you execute, how you deal with people, your emotional intelligence, and interacting with the people that you work with, and understanding the structures in which you're operating within when you're doing your daily work, your jobs, and understanding the art of the possible. What's, not what are we doing now, but what's possible? How can we enhance this? How can we expand what we're doing? How can we grow it?
And that's a world of thought that's not necessarily militaristic. I mean, most that seems to me is you're following orders, but you seem to think outside of your realm.
Yeah.
Is that something you always had done?
Yeah. I've always been the person that created something where there was nothing. I think I would have probably been a better, startup founder than a military officer. I'll give you some examples. So I know you spoke with Rusty Buchanan. One of the things that I did when I was the Deputy Chief of Staff for Communications in Afghanistan as a senior communications guy, we were looking at reputational issues in dealing with the Afghan population. And we realized that the Afghans are a very sports-oriented culture. And so I worked with the embassy to create a sports diplomacy program that could cross a lot of different boundaries, because you can bring a lot of different people together with sports. And, we put together a program. We got some grant money through the State Department, and we did a couple of things. One, we did some refurbishments on the Afghan National Stadium, the Ghazi Stadium, which was the, where they had like their national soccer championships, and then when the Taliban took over, that's where they did the executions.
Crazy. I read about that. It's just ridiculous.
And so we refurbished it and brought in new turf and new lights and helped them,
I mean, that's not only practical, but it's so symbolic to take something that the previous, I don't even know, the previous ruling party, I suppose, had used for executions, and then to turn it into sport. That's
right.
Really something.
Well, we returned it to what it was. It was a gem, and it was a gemstone of the Afghan people, and particularly in Kabul. And so, we filled the stadium and had a ribbon cutting, and we had the, my boss, General John Allen, who was the head of the International Security Assistance Force there, and the head of the Afghan National Olympic Committee, Lieutenant General Zahir Akbar,
did you take a second to look around and go, wow?
Oh, well, every single day.
That's
but
unbelievable.
so this program Denny, that we put together. We used funds that we were able to raise to take the members of the Afghan National Olympic Committee and bring them to the United States.
Right.
And we wanted them to see what was possible, what their sports programs could look like, as opposed to being in a cinder block, house with old equipment or whatever, working out, as opposed to like some modern training facilities. So we took them to Florida. We went to the IMG academies. We went to, I think it was University of Central Florida. We took them to a handful of AAU different events. We also went to the AAU headquarters, and we spent some time there. And then we went up to Colorado Springs for 2 days with the U.S. Olympic Committee up there, and met with some different individuals there, took them back. And then a month later, we had a delegation come from the United States of coaches that were representing AAU to go to Afghanistan essentially for a week and train the trainer. We were training all the coaches for youth sports, boys and girls. And
Which that second part is crazy.
Right.
That would have never been spoken before.
That's right. And so we had volleyball, we had soccer, we had basketball, and we had taekwondo, and those were the 4 sports that we did.
Yeah.
And that was an innovation. That was an innovation. That was something that
innovation.
didn't exist.
And now when you entered the Navy, though, I think I read somewhere that journalism was what you were most interested in at that point. Is that, or is that just something you kind of picked?
So the real story is that I was on track to be a nuclear submarine engineer. And
when you first checked
when I first enlisted, and then I had my physical, and I'm completely colorblind. And so then they said, well, there's about three jobs you can do.
Oh, wow.
And so I took journalism because I'd always been a writer, and I'd always enjoyed that. And then when I was commissioned as an officer, there was a couple jobs I could do. One was supply corps, which is supply logistics, supply chain management, stuff like that. And then the other was aviation maintenance, and that would have been spent a lot of time aboard aircraft carriers working on aircraft, et cetera.
I see. Okay.
And so I took supply corps, and they sent me through training after officer candidate school. They sent me through training for supply corps, and then I went to my first ship in Hawaii, Pearl Harbor. And, I was an assistant supply officer on board a ship at
What's
sea.
an assistant supply officer general responsibilities?
So I had a division of about 30 guys, and I was a paymaster, so I was responsible for all the paydays and taking care of everybody's pay. So I actually had a safe. This was back in the days when we had a safe with cash. So I would go to sea with like $500,000, $750,000 in my safe, and I'd have to, maintain all the logs and do all, complete all the administrative accounting and all that.
I don't think the Somali pirates weren't around at that time.
Well, they weren't, and they would have never gotten on board a United States warship as well. But I did that, and I was also the division officer for the food service and division officer for the guys that ordered all the supplies on board the ship, and also ship services. So I was responsible for the guys that cut hair, do the laundry on board ship, run the ship store, and sell all the stuff. And and I enjoyed that, but it wasn't great.
Gave you some practical knowledge of how
some practical business knowledge.
Yeah, sure.
And then I kind of tracked with the public affairs because that was closely related to writing stories and sort of the things that I had already been trained in. And I eventually moved over into that area.
You one important time I think that seemed defining is the bombing of the USS Cole.
Yeah.
Were you in that area at that time, or were you sent to that after that happened?
So
that was 2000?
Yeah, that's correct. October 12th, 2000. So, Denny, I would tell you that I'm a big believer in individual defining moments. And I believe that, we all have these episodes in our lives when something happens that pushes us beyond what we've ever done before, and you're stretched as an individual. You're forced to go further, do more than you've ever done before. And what happens is you never return to what you were after that experience. And so that defining moment changes you, for the good. I'm a big believer in that. And there were several of those incidents in my my military career. I early spent a lot of time in the Middle East, and I was at the
early in your
I was deployed on the aircraft carrier multiple times to the Persian Gulf while we were enforcing sanctions against Iraq in the latter half of Desert Storm, and then I was back in the Middle East at at the headquarters there, Bahrain, in Manama, Bahrain, which is the Middle Persian Gulf. That's the U.S. Fifth Fleet headquarters. And so since I'd already served there multiple times, when USS Cole was attacked, I was called upon to go there. And so I'll tell you a little story. So it was early in the morning. It was probably, I used to go into work in Washington, D.C. at about 6 a.m. or so. And as I was going in, one of my guys that worked for me called me and said, hey, he was a duty officer in the Pentagon, and he said, I'm going to be in late. He says, we've got a real problem. We've got USS Cole with a hole blown in the side of it, and we're missing a number of sailors. It's going to be a long day. And this was a guy that was, that worked for me that wasn't going to be coming in because he was having to stay in the Pentagon with the duty that he had. And shortly after that, I got a call from the head of our community, the admiral in charge, and he said, hey, we're sending the Foreign Emergency Support Team to Yemen, the FEST, as they call it, which is a counterterrorism unit. And he said, we need a spokesman representative, and you're the guy. You've got the experience. Get your bags packed. 4 hours to get to Andrews Air Force Base, and wheels up. And then
did you know what your detail would be? Did you have your mind around
no idea.
what you're going to
no
who
idea
you're going to
no
talk
idea
to?
because I didn't know anything about the FEST or anything like that.
This is it.
And
this is that moment.
And anyway, I joined the FEST, and we flew on a back of an aircraft or C-9 and ended up in Aden, Yemen. We touched down, and they wouldn't let us get out of the airplane for 6 or 8 hours.
Jeez. Basically,
we couldn't leave the airport area because they were concerned about clearances, and there was a lot of it.
Wow.
Anyway, and so I actually knew the commanding officer of USS Cole, Kirk Lippold. I mean, we had met in the Pentagon, and that was something, being down there. And I was essentially the spokesperson supporting the Joint Task Force commander, Rear Admiral Lobster Fitzgerald. And then the ambassador as well from Aden, Yemen, came down, or from Sana'a came down to Aden, Barbara Bodine, and so she was there, and then the Joint Task Force commander were there, and they were kind of the two heads of the organization that were trying to support the Foreign Emergency Support Team in this investigation and sort of the recovery of bodies and everything else.
Jeez, what was your rank at this time?
I was a commander. I was commander.
Is commander right before Rear Admiral?
Commander is before captain.
For captain, then.
Yeah. So that was one of my.
That must have been that's your big moment.
It was certainly one of them, and Louis Freeh, the head of the FBI, came in and did a press briefing, and we were there for 4 weeks or so trying to recover the ship and get the ship in a situation where we could tow it back to the U.S. And I was there with the group, and then I ended up flying home on the airplane with the crew. That came off of Cole when they towed it back.
Anything that had previous that had prepared you to be in that kind of situation?
Yeah. I've been the guy. I had been the spokesman in crisis situations before. Back in 1994, I was in the Middle East in Bahrain, and this was after the original Gulf War. And Saddam Hussein put 70,000 troops on the border with Kuwait. And I was down in Bahrain, and my boss says, hey, I need somebody. I got 150 media that are working out of this press center up in Kuwait. We need to send a representative to represent the Navy and tell the Navy story. And got on an airplane and went up there. And there were no other military spokesmen up there. I was the only one. And so, then we set up operations to take journalists out to the different ships. The Marine Amphibious Task Force was in the Gulf. We took journalists out there to see what was going on. And it was essentially a near crisis. Well, we were working at crisis sort of speed, but it was a very sort of tenuous situation. And the bottom line, instead of going into a long story about it, the bottom line was all the things that were done at the seat of government with the Secretary of Defense and the President, and the work that we did, getting, telling this story in the Gulf and showing the images. Like I took 130 people on 4 buses out in the middle of the desert for a combat demonstration, a firepower demonstration. Marine helicopters flying in, the troops getting out, the Marines getting out, firing weapons, blowing stuff up. And basically this video was captured by every single network in the world. There were 17 different television networks that were present there, all different languages, for that one exercise. And those were going out, those stories were all over the airwaves, all the TV. We knew that Saddam Hussein watched CNN and all that. And it was about 5 days straight of that, with sleeping 1 or 2 hours a night, getting up and doing something similar the next day to show the flag and demonstrate deterrence, to demonstrate this force is out there. And, there's a lot of firepower. Don't you even think about it. He withdrew his troops.
Denny.
What?
It's time for a commercial.
I know, but I'm talking to the Admiral. Casablanca Restaurant in Venice, California. Proud sponsor of Sports Stories with Denny Lennon. Also sponsoring the Facebook Live at 5 Friday show.
Margaritas.
That's right. Carlos is kind enough at Casablanca to package up like a to-go, what they're selling, right? To-go. What is in it? It's like that taco
bar? Daily deal. He does basically a taco bar with 2 different meats, beans, rice, tortillas. It's fantastic.
Brilliant. And then you throw in the margaritas with that. And if you watch our Friday show, you'll see that we cheers one another. He sends one over to Venice, where Marley and the Rices are hosting part of the show, over here to the 7428 studio.
And any local guests.
And any local guests. Doug O'Neill.
Benefit as well.
Doug O'Neill, the Triple Crown winner, horse trainer, is a new big fan. So, thank you, Carlos. You can call Carlos at 310-505-5091. Again, 310-505-5091. Call Carlos. Ask him for the Sports Stories with Denny Lennon special. He's going to throw in margaritas or a big percentage off.
Vámonos a Casablanca. Vámonos a Casablanca. Vámonos a Casablanca. La comida para la familia. Vámonos a Casablanca. Vámonos a Casablanca.
Now back to our interview with Rear Admiral Hal Pittman.
And you're getting those repetitions in that kind of position.
That's right.
At a very in a very intense situation.
Yeah.
That leads you to eventually. I heard you recently speaking on one podcast or another about communication integration.
Yes.
So whether it's that situation, a situation with Cole, or moving into situations in Afghanistan, it's being able to properly communicate, in effect, your mission.
Well, I think,
or in effect,
So I will tell you that number one, it's about telling a story of the mission of the United States Navy, the mission of Joint Forces, and that serves in and of itself as a deterrent for those who would wish ill on the United States and our allies. So that was one thing, and in that particular instance in 1994, that was a deterrent, and Saddam Hussein withdrew his forces and took them home. We found out later, after the U.S. invaded Iraq back in 2003, the intelligence we gathered showed that he had every intent of coming back across the border to try to retake the Kuwaiti oil fields and use them as a bargaining chip to have sanctions lifted. But the work that we did deterred him from doing that because he didn't feel like he would be successful with all the firepower that he saw in the Gulf.
Yeah.
So the message integration is kind of a tool, but it's a tool that I worked to perfect when I was at higher level headquarters in the Pentagon and also in Afghanistan. And it's really about being able to have a consistent message over a very large geographic area and a very large operation. So it's a series of sort of tactics and techniques and procedures to be able to keep everybody aligned. When you have a policy,
languages and there's different platforms
of
technology.
Oh yeah, of course.
This
of course.
is difficult.
Of course, and everybody has their own political position and all that, and it's really about trying to gather your arms around all that and have a concise narrative that you're able to get out there.
And so you said it starts at the top.
Oh, yeah, it always starts at the top. Having a senior leader who has clear guidance and provides right and left boundaries, and then that's how everybody else falls in under those boundaries.
And they got to get used to telling that story over and over again.
Over and over
because
again.
You don't know
More
who's
than
listening to the first time, third time.
So when I was the press secretary and communications lead for General John Abizaid, who was the Central Command commander from 2003 to 2007. That was during the invasion of Iraq, early years of Iraq and Afghanistan.
Afghanistan, yeah.
And we would travel, and he said to me one time, how sometimes I get tired of saying the same things over and over again. And I said, boss, for you, it's the 100th time. Some people, it's the first or second time they've heard it. And it really takes about 6 or 7 times for it to settle in. So you just got to keep, when you're the senior leader, you got to keep on telling that same story over and over again. And I'll give you another story, too. I love John Abizaid. He's a fantastic man. He's now the ambassador to Saudi Arabia. And so we were in the United Arab Emirates. And our group would go on these battlefield circulations, and we would go to Iraq, and we would go all around Iraq and see what the troops are doing and have different briefings. And we'd spend a week in Iraq, and then we'd go to Kuwait, and then we'd go to Bahrain and go out on like the aircraft carrier to see what the battle group is doing. So we ended up in the UAE, and we were staying at the hotel, and so different Arab countries have a different different rules as it pertains to whether they allow alcohol in bars. And so the UAE is a little bit more progressive. And so there was this Mexican restaurant at the hotel, and they had alcohol there. So we go in and have dinner. And so we're sitting up here, and it's a Filipino cover band, and they're playing American, rock and roll music, and they've got like a Ukrainian singer, and here we are eating Mexican food, and we're drinking German beer. And Abizaid looks at me and goes, Hal, this is what it's all about. And I said, what are you talking about, sir? He goes, choice. We're fighting about choice. We're fighting over choice to give people the freedoms that they want to have to do whatever they want to do.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's pretty profound.
I like that right there. You said the German beer, and it reminded me that the Afghanistan, I was just reading up a little bit because, for those of us that haven't been in the military, some of us, like I love history, and so, but understanding your world, it's so fascinating. Right. And anyway, so I want to dive in a little bit. The Afghans stayed out of World War I because the Germans were getting drunk too often when they were trying to woo them over. And they're just like, no, we're not going to join those drunk people. And you're talking about the German beer. I thought, that was a good one. Because Afghanistan stayed out of the world wars.
Yeah.
Only, to have their own internal conflicts and then to be invaded by Russia. Right. And so the difference between the Soviets, their purpose rolling in is entirely different than our purpose on the post side, and what we left was a structure, and what the Soviets left was
a lack of structure, a lot of rubble. Yeah. So the challenge came when after post-Soviet. The post-Soviet time, there was kind of a lull as Afghanistan tried to right itself and sort of, come back to being an independent country after having, so many years of occupation. And that's when, the Taliban became a power, obviously a very harshly conservative interpretation of Islam, very, very violent, the Wahhabist kind of form of Islam. And that came in from the different mosques and, the different religious schools. And basically that civil war, they took over the country and they inhabited the country for a period of time. And they were also the ones that harbored Osama bin Laden, and Al-Qaeda. And so that's entered the United States after 9/11.
Yeah, exactly, to actually excise their ability to.
Now, and what we have done, I'll tell you this. I mean, we put a lot of money into Afghanistan and a lot of treasure, and we helped build a structure, and we helped the Afghans create a form of self-governance. It's their form of self-governance, their own parliament. And there's certainly a lot more structure there now than there was when we got there, or even that there was before. There's a lot of development, etc. But you know what? It was one of the very poorest countries in the world before, and it still remains one of the poorest countries, that there is. Even though they have great mineral wealth, they don't have the capacity to take it out and be able to benefit from it. So
there was in all of this, you've risen to Rear Admiral, and you have a very important position in what was the ISAF.
ISAF, yeah.
ISAF.
International Security Assistance Force.
And so you have this really important
NATO.
position, but anytime you had to yourself that you could get away, you would get on that 20-hour flight back to go see if you couldn't make it for some competition or something that your boy might be in. I read one of your either journals or blogs, and I was touched by that because it might scale it way back to 2-hour plane flights. But I used to be in some kind of city doing something, and I always made the arrangement because I used to announce a lot for women's pro beach volleyball and this stuff.
Yeah.
And I always made the arrangement with them that, no, I need that red-eye flight. I'm not going on that flight because I'll miss my daughter singing in the choir. I'll miss my son's game.
Yeah.
And I used to, make those sacrifices on my own level.
Right.
They weren't
right.
20 hours leaving a war zone, but I got that. Like, I related to you on that. Like, your time was, this is where I need to be.
So we had, it was in 2009 when Evan went to his first Junior Olympic Games, and we had this fabulous time. And our agreement was always, he competed in a couple of events, won 2 gold medals in his first 2 competitions, and we had this agreement that, if he trained hard, we would find a way to make it work. And so this was in summer of 2011, so it would have been, whatever 3rd or 4th Junior Olympic Games. And we weren't going to miss it because of me, So I just had to make that arrangement that it was a 1-year deployment, and I got 2 weeks in the middle of it sometime to take at my discretion, and I planned that 2 weeks so I could come home and we could go to the Junior Olympic Games, because that was the big thing of our year, And I knew that we had to find people to help him train. And he was training in both, taekwondo and powerlifting. And, I just wanted to make sure that it worked out, and it did.
I would imagine the biggest arrangement, the biggest contract you had to land was with your wife to carry the load while you were gone, huh?
Well, I married the perfect woman. She had been a military officer herself, ROTC. Her dad was a colonel in the Air Force. She has a long history of military officers in her family, and she grew up as a military brat in Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War. So she had all those experiences, and she knew what it was like. And so,
and the sense of sacrifice.
Yeah. I mean, when you're in the military, you go away to execute national policy. That's your job. In the purest sense. I mean, as they say, kill people and break things. But it really is about a huge lever of national power and national policy.
There's comparisons often, and probably sometimes they're used inappropriately, but for the most part, between the military and athletics. I mean, football borrows all of the all of the terminology and those kind of things. But I find this intersection is really interesting. Whether you were making, that kind of sacrifice, or when you talked about the Ghazi Olympic Stadium, or just this diplomacy of sport, trying to bridge the gap between our culture and another culture. It's fascinating to me what sports can do to bridge these gaps.
Yeah. Well, I think so. A friend of mine, Harrison Bernstein, runs Soldiers to Sidelines, and his thought is that military members make some of the very best coaches in sports because we're absolutely taught to be selfless. It's about service and being a service-oriented leader.
Something bigger than yourself.
Yeah, it's all about the team. It's all about preparing the team, preparing your team to move ahead. And I think that it's the best coaches that you find are very similar in the way that they handle each individual athlete differently, but equally, and and focus on the team and making the team ready. And it's not about their own their own cult of personality, but rather about pushing the team ahead and winning. Dabo Sweeney's a perfect example from Clemson. I mean, I just love the way he coaches and brings his teams about, and it's about creating a family-like atmosphere.
Yeah, that and there's something that's just so authentic about that approach to it, and this ability to perhaps affect change in a country like Afghanistan. One of the points you made was, I think, like 70% of the population is below the age of 25 or something.
It's probably even more than that, Denny.
Wow,
there's a huge youth bulge. There's this huge youth bulge, and there's a lack of
wild.
jobs, and so
wild.
and when there are no jobs and people can't see past today because they don't have food on the table. They can't envision a future where where development and trade and commerce and the things that run our society that we know, they can't see that. And so you can also see why it's easy for young people to fall prey to things like the Taliban or radical groups. I mean, because particularly if they're earning a salary,
and sadly, there's a sense of belonging there.
That's right. There's a sense of belonging. There's a sense of team, and it's guarantees that I've got food on my table and I've got clothes on my back, and and they're going to take care of me. There's a brotherhood there, even if the theocracy that they're talking about is definitely tainted.
Yeah.
You don't see it because you're in the day-to-day fight.
So you've done this unbelievable work in these different parts of the world, but now you're here, right? And so this is a new part of your life, and being stateside all the time. And tell me about a few of the things you're involved with now.
Sure.
Because I understand it's not just one thing. It seems like you have to have 5, 6, or 7 things. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I get my own intel. I have my own intel.
Well, so I retired from the Navy right at 30 years in 2012, and my next job after the Navy was I ran Special Olympics Iowa for a little over a year, a very sort of service-focused nonprofit, and then I was recruited here into a corporate role.
Okay.
And so the corporate role allowed us to, have some opportunities with the family and allowed Evan to get some training that he wasn't getting in Iowa. And so, we came here and we've been here since 2014, so going on 6 years now, and it's been very, very good. And, but again, in the vein of innovating when there's a need, I've seen a need in a couple of different things. One is we formed an organization, the Arizona Corporate Council on Veteran Careers. Mm-hmm. This is really about workforce development in the state of Arizona for veterans, and it is a freestanding business coalition, if you will, of about 35 companies now that we've grown it to, that employ veterans, and we look at things like best practices, creating guidebooks for veteran employee networking groups, having mixers where we bring in student veterans from the different colleges to network with these companies that hire veterans, that kind of work. We launched, we were the sponsors of CyberVets USA, which is Arizona's the 4th state in the country to do that program, which is free training. So that's one thing. I was the founding president of Veterans and Energy, which is a national networking group for veterans who are in the energy business, and do a lot of work out of Washington, D.C. on training and development. I was on the USA Bobsled and Skeleton Federation board for about five years until I found that it was just too difficult with the timing of the board meetings and being able to spend the time away from work. I've been on the AAU Strength Sports board since about 2011. And I'm a vice chairman with them, and we do some meets, and I'm an international judge and a masters competitor and, that kind of stuff. And so, and then to be honest with you, when opportunities come up, I just look at them, and if there's time available, I'll consider, taking it. But it's got to really be in the vein of the stuff that, I'm doing now. Yeah. So it's either veteran, business related, or it's sports. Those are sort of my two passions.
And obviously mine was sports, and with this sports stories, it's just a new, this passion that we're following, right? But there was something that happened, as I told you, at a friend's house. They had a charity event where they were honoring somebody, but it was a night where the Heroes movement was kind of, launched into our little atmosphere. And there really was something so moving about what those veterans gave, but not just what they gave, but what they're looking forward to in life.
Yeah.
And that they needed a path to get there now, and they weren't asking for anything out of the ordinary, and it was just so moving that's where I decided to form that relationship, and that's how eventually, came across you. And so, whatever we can do to work together to support that kind of mission, both through sports and with veterans, we're all in.
So, Downey, I find that veterans transition is one of the toughest things veterans face, because what happens is they usually go into this culture very young, and so they're brought up in this, they go to high school or whatever, maybe college, and then they go into this culture of the U.S. military, and we provide them with housing, and they have their job, and they have their same, uniform that they wear every day,
right.
and it's a culture unto itself, and they're held to a different set of rules and standards that are pretty high, pretty strict, and then they, something that's called networking, in the military would actually be like against the Uniform Code of Military Justice, because it would be fraternization. So you don't like schmooze your seniors. It doesn't happen that way. And so we teach people to do, to behave in a certain way, and then they come out and we expect them to be able to go find a job. Well, they have to be retrained and recalibrated because they're in a completely different culture now. Even though it's American culture, they've never experienced it from the standpoint of trying to get a job or, trying to have a resume and brag about their accomplishments or anything like that. So, I know how it was, how challenging it was just retiring at my level. And I couldn't imagine what it's like to come out after 4 or 6 years and, be trying to find that entry level and explain how your skill set fits in with a square hole, for a particular job. Because military members bring all these intangibles like leadership and, team focus and execution focus and being able to get a job done. But they, if you look at the average job, those skill sets probably don't match.
They don't match.
And so they have to, learn all over again how to, fit themselves into those kinds of roles.
Well,
so I have a lot of passion around that.
You do, and it shows. It shows. So congratulations.
Anyway. Thank you, sir.
Congratulations on a well-deserved next phase of your life.
And you didn't ask me any questions about, like, Thomas Magnum or Magnum PI.
I was hoping you were going to ask me about that. You were ready for that?
Okay, yeah,
well,
sure.
Because
let's go.
Here's the problem, is I know because you're Navy, unlike that McKay kid who's too young and he didn't know and he felt all embarrassed on my show. Do you know Magnum?
A little bit.
Do you know what sport he played at
So
Naval College?
I don't know what sport he played, but I can tell you a few things about him.
Okay, fair enough.
So
let's do that.
My guess is either football or swimming. I don't know.
Football's one of them.
Okay, but he was a Navy SEAL in Vietnam.
He was.
And then he went into intelligence, and he was stationed in Hawaii, and he got out of the Navy in Hawaii after 10 or 11 years to become a private investigator, and his two best buddies are guys that he was in the SEALs with.
No.
Right?
You missed on the last part. They were it was like a force that was combined with. There was one guy that was a Marine that flew the chopper, another guy who I think was infantry.
Okay.
And they were all like specialists
Right.
in their own group.
Yeah.
And then they did that stuff in Vietnam. That's why they all settled together in Hawaii.
Anyway, so
so
that's
there
the
you
story.
go.
Yeah.
You're pretty good.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. Did you ever watch that show at all?
Yeah.
It was a great show. I loved it. It was my first reference to Hawaii. And
Hawaii.
Hawaii 5-0 was my first reference to
Right.
Hawaii. And then that followed,
But
and
see,
I was like, I got to go
But
there.
here's the deal. Hawaii 5-0 was like a gritty crime drama.
Yeah.
But where a Magnum PI was like all the beauty of the islands,
It
right?
was, yeah.
So, I mean,
Beautiful
it was like a love story around Hawaii.
It was.
So,
All right,
anyway.
you're actually officially in the Magnum Club.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Admiral.
Yes, sir,
Appreciate
Denny.
it.
Thank you.
Now it's time for an installment of As Time Goes By, where we get to know Carlos Haro Jr. of Casablanca Restaurant in Venice 1 minute at a time. Now, let's play it again with Carlos Jr. Venice being home to Casablanca.
Yes.
Right? And St. Mark being the place where you and I met.
Right.
Okay, pivotal time in your life.
Yes.
I would hope. Okay. All right, so Venice was originally called Venice of America, and it was founded in 1905 by who?
Abbott Kinney.
Nailed it. Casablanca Restaurant is located on the corner of Lincoln Boulevard and Rose Avenue in Venice. Okay. Sports Stories with Denny Lennon is supported by the AAU. Find a local event and join at aausports.org. And remember, you can catch your favorite amateur sports live stream, replays, and highlights at ballertv.com. Sports Stories, along with East Bay, supports the Heroes Movement, a nonprofit that bridges the gap from mental or physical therapy to getting strong again through strength and conditioning workouts. This free service is available for any veteran of the United States Armed Forces. Visit heroesmovementusa.org for more information. Sports Stories, along with thousands of people across the country, also supports the My Stuff Bags Foundation, a nonprofit that provides traumatized children with new belongings and new hope. Learn more at mystuffbags.org. Sports Stories with Denny Lennon is a production of Sports Stories, Inc. and is available on Apple Podcasts and YouTube or wherever you listen and watch. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and give us a review. It really helps spread the word. You can find all our social media links, archives, and other info on our website at sportsstoriespodcast.com. Special thanks to the John R. Wooden Course and Wooden's Wisdom. Original music for Sports Stories is courtesy of Lennon Music Productions. Original images by Ciena Lennon Photography. Sports Stories is produced by Marley Rice, edited by Bob McCall, and researched by Teresa Dolan. Additional staff include Christine Jinbo, Jake Downey, Ray Castro, and Buck Magic Lennon.
Ground control to Major Tom. That gets me. Sports Stories with Denny Lennon. His podcast is on Thursdays. On Facebook, you can catch him on Wednesdays and Fridays. And he's also got a blog. This guy is out of this world. Ground control to Major Tom. Oh, boy.
Check it out, Buck.